praise. The Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit thou womb chooses. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death.
Testing 1 2 3 testing. Hello. 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 Testing 1 2 3 testing. Hello. 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 My beloved soul, I see you in your quiet moments of doubt, when the world sleeps and your questions echo in the darkness. Today, through this Jesus on podcast, I wish to illuminate the path that many walk blindly. A path where the most significant battles are fought not with weapons of steel, but with the invisible armor of faith. Like the shepherd who knows when a wolf approaches his flock, I sense your unease about those you love who have changed. Has not the desert traveler within you wondered why the oasis of a once loving family has turned to sand? Have you not questioned why the friend whose eyes once reflected the stars now carries shadows where light once lived? These are not mere shifts in the wind of human nature. They are signs of an ancient struggle playing between light and darkness. Listen with your heart today, for the words I share through this Jesus on podcast are seeds meant to grow into gardens of discernment within you. The enemy, the architect of chaos, does not announce his arrival with trumpets. He comes as a thief in the night, stealing joy, planting division, transforming love into suspicion. He whispers stories that turn children of the light into orphans wandering in darkness, though they remain heirs to the kingdom of heaven. I have walked many roads with you, through valleys of shadow and mountains of glory. On this journey, I have watched as souls you cherish have been covered by clouds that obscure their true nature. You have witnessed hearts once gentle become fortresses of stone, tongues once kind become weapons of war, spirits once aligned with truth now bend toward deception. And in your tears, I have tasted your confusion, your hurt, your feeling of powerlessness. Today, through these words, I offer you the lantern of discernment, to see clearly when the enemy weaves his illusions in the lives surrounding you. For in naming the shadow, you diminish its power. In recognizing the false paths, you can better illuminate the true one, not only for yourself, but for those who have wandered from the light. Remember always, the battle we face is not against those we love. They are not vessels of enmity, but territories being contested. Your sister whose nature seems transformed is not your opponent. She is a garden where weeds seek to overgrow flowers. Your brother who rejects what he once embraced is not your adversary. He is a book whose story is being rewritten by hands not his own. If these words resonate within the chambers of your heart, if they name what you have felt but could not express, know that our meeting in this moment is written in the stars. This message finds you not by chance, but by divine appointment, because someone in your orbit needs the wisdom you will carry forward from this sacred exchange. Now, I ask you not merely to listen, but to act. If my words have touched your spirit, like this video, so others seeking light in darkness might find it. Subscribe to Jesus on Podcast, not just with a click but with your heart, so that whenever confusion clouds your path, my voice will reach you with clarity. Share this message immediately with those 3 souls who first came to mind as you listened, the ones whose transformation has caused you grief. And comment below with the phrase, "I choose discernment," to declare your commitment to seeing beyond the veil of physical reality into the spiritual dimensions where the true battle rages. Do this now, beloved, for in your action, you become not merely a listener of divine wisdom, but a bearer of light in places where darkness has grown comfortable. In your sharing, you become my hands, reaching those I wish to touch through you. My child, though the war for souls rages fiercely, you stand protected in my love. Together, we will explore how to recognize the enemy's handiwork, how to shield your spirit from his attempts, and how to stand as a lighthouse for those lost in storms of confusion. For where I am present, redemption is not just possible, it is promised. Where my light shines, restoration is not just hoped for, it is assured. And where my love flows, it always, without exception, overcomes. The night may seem endless to one lost in a forest, but dawn always arrives. Hold this truth close as we venture together into understanding the shadows where the enemy operates, bringing the brilliance of awareness that makes darkness retreat. My children, the landscape of your soul is like a garden, a sacred space where virtues bloom alongside the thorns of human weakness. Yet there exists a gardener other than myself who seeks entry, not to cultivate, but to corrupt. Just as a traveler in the desert learns to read the subtle shifts of sand that signal an approaching storm, so must you learn to recognize the signs when the enemy has begun to influence those you love. The devil works not with thunderous declaration, but with whispered deception. He is the architect of gradual transformation, altering the spiritual blueprint of a soul, so subtly that many fail to notice until the structure barely resembles its original design. As the alchemist knows that true transformation begins with recognition of what is base before it can become gold, so must you recognize the enemy's handiwork before healing can begin. Consider the friend whose character once reflected the morning light, whose words brought comfort, and whose actions spoke of integrity. Have you not witnessed a gradual eclipsing of this light? It begins perhaps with small compromises, the occasional unkindness dismissed as a bad day, the slight dishonesty justified by circumstance. Then, like a river changing course, their moral compass begins to shift. What once troubled their conscience now brings no remorse. What once inspired their spirit now provokes their scorn. This transformation in character and morality is not the natural evolution of a soul seeking growth. It is the signature of an influence that thrives in shadow. Notice too how those under the enemy's sway develop a curious resistance to learning and growth. The mind that once sought wisdom now rejects it. The heart that embraced understanding now deflects it. They become like a traveler who refuses water in the desert, inexplicably rejecting that which would sustain them. This resistance manifests not as thoughtful disagreement, but as reflexive rejection, as though truth itself has become offensive to their nature. Most troubling is the emergence of a reckless hatred for truth, a hostility toward reality that cannot be explained by mere confusion or misunderstanding. Like a bird that suddenly fears the sky, they develop an aversion to that which once gave them freedom. They twist facts to suit narratives that keep them bound, and they attack those who speak with clarity and honesty. In their eyes, you see not disagreement but disdain, not doubt but destruction. The rejection of purity and holiness follows, a turning away from the clean waters of virtue toward the muddied pools of moral compromise. That which is innocent becomes suspicious, that which is virtuous becomes burdensome. They speak of freedom while forging their own chains, link by link, choice by choice. Have you not seen, in those influenced by darkness, a growing attraction to that which wounds rather than heals? They find themselves drawn to influences that darken rather than illuminate, to relationships that deplete rather than nourish, to habits that enslave rather than liberate. Like moths to flame, they move toward that which will ultimately consume them, convinced they approach light when they court destruction. Perhaps most heartbreaking is the loss of compassion, the withering of love's tender shoots in the garden of their heart. The soul that once wept at the suffering of others now passes by unmoved. The hands that once reached out in generosity now clench in protection of self-interest. The voice that spoke words of encouragement now falls silent or, worse, joins the chorus of criticism that wounds the vulnerable. And finally, there emerges a resistance to my presence, a turning away from prayer, from scripture, from communion with me and with other believers. Like a child who runs from the very parent who seeks to protect them, they flee from the embrace that would shelter them from harm. My name becomes foreign on their lips. My teachings become burdensome to their minds. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. John 10 verse 27. When my sheep no longer recognize my voice, when the familiar becomes strange, and the strange becomes familiar, know that another shepherd calls to them, one who leads not to green pastures but to barren wastelands. If tears form as you recognize these signs in someone you cherish, know that your grief is but a shadow of my own. For I see not only what they have become, but what they were created to be. I know the magnificence of their original design, the splendor of their potential, the beauty of their true nature beneath the distortion. Now, I ask you to pause this video and take a moment to reflect. Close your eyes and bring to mind the faces of those in your life who display these signs. In the silence of your heart, whisper their names to me. Then return to this Jesus on Podcast episode, prepared to receive wisdom on how to stand in the gap for these precious souls. For in naming what we face, we begin to disarm it. In recognizing the enemy's tactics, we take the first step toward countering them. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and the journey of reclaiming what the enemy has stolen begins with acknowledgement of the theft. My beloved, in the realm of spiritual warfare, I offer you not merely observations but divine wisdom. Like the shepherd who recognizes which herbs heal and which poison, I will show you the teachings that illuminate this battle that rages beyond physical sight. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal. They are mighty through God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments, and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of truth. Consider first the nature of discernment. Discernment is not suspicion, which sees evil where none exists, nor is it naivety, which fails to recognize darkness even when it casts its shadow. Discernment is the divine ability to perceive reality as it truly is, to see beyond appearances into the essence of things. It is the gift I offer to those who seek wisdom beyond human understanding. Like the desert traveler who learns to read the stars to find his way, you must learn to read the spiritual atmosphere surrounding those you love. This reading requires stillness of heart and clarity of vision. When you stand beside still waters, even the smallest pebble's ripple becomes visible. So too, when your spirit is calm, the subtle movements of darkness become apparent. The first principle in this battle is the recognition that you fight not against flesh and blood. The person whose behavior wounds you has become a battlefield rather than an enemy. To wage war against the person is to misunderstand the nature of the conflict entirely. It would be like the farmer who, finding weeds among his wheat, attacks the soil rather than carefully removing that which chokes the harvest. The second principle is the power of persistent light. Darkness cannot exist where light continuously shines. This light manifests through consistent truth-speaking, not harsh words thrown like weapons, but gentle truth offered like bread. Speak truth not in moments of anger, but in moments of love. Speak it not with condemnation, but with compassion. Speak it not to win arguments, but to illuminate paths. Remember the story of the persistent widow who, through her unwavering requests to the unjust judge, finally received justice. So too must you be persistent in prayer for those under the enemy's influence. The enemy may have access to their minds through deception, but I have access to their hearts through your prayers. Like water that gradually shapes stone, your consistent prayers shape realities unseen by human eyes. The third principle concerns the armor you must wear in this battle. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. Your breastplate of righteousness protects not through perfect behavior, but through a heart aligned with divine purpose. Your shield of faith defends not through blind belief, but through tested trust. Your sword of the Spirit cuts not through angry debate, but through words aligned with eternal truth. Consider how the master sculptor sees the magnificent form hidden within rough marble. With patient, precise strokes, he reveals what was always present but obscured. So must you see the divine image in those who have been temporarily marred by the enemy's influence. They are not defined by their current state, but by their eternal identity, beloved children created in my image. The fourth principle is the power of divine perspective. From the mountaintop, the labyrinth that seemed impossible to navigate from within becomes a simple pattern easily traced by the eye. So too, when you rise to see situations through my eternal perspective, what seemed hopelessly complex becomes clear. This perspective comes through meditation on my word, through silence in my presence, through communion with my spirit. Remember that the enemy's primary tactic is isolation, to separate the lamb from the shepherd, the branch from the vine, the ember from the fire. Therefore, community becomes not merely a comfort, but a strategic necessity. Surround yourself with those who strengthen your discernment rather than cloud it, who speak truth when falsehood would be easier, who remind you of the light when darkness seems overwhelming. The fifth principle concerns the power of your own spiritual health. The guardian cannot protect others if he himself is vulnerable. The healer cannot offer restoration if she herself is wounded. Thus, your first responsibility is to maintain your own connection to the divine source, to ensure that your own spirit remains aligned with truth, that your own heart continues to beat in rhythm with love. Consider how the wise desert traveler drinks deeply when water is plentiful, knowing that dry stretches lie ahead. So must you drink deeply of spiritual nourishment in seasons of abundance, strengthening yourself for times when resources seem scarce. Develop habits of prayer that sustain when emotion fails. Establish practices of worship that endure when circumstances challenge faith. Now, I invite you to take action. Pause this Jesus on Podcast episode and find a quiet place where you can be alone with me. Take a piece of paper and write at the top, Divine Strategies for Spiritual Protection. Below this, write the names of those you love who show signs of the enemy's influence. Beside each name, write one specific truth you will speak into their life, one prayer you will consistently offer, and one way you will demonstrate unconditional love. Then return to this message, fortified with purpose and clarity. For in this battle, it is not enough to recognize darkness, you must become carriers of light. It is not enough to identify the enemy's tactics, you must implement divine strategies. The warrior who merely studies the art of combat, but never enters the field cannot claim victory. So too, this wisdom must move from understanding to application, from knowledge to power. My beloved, knowledge without application becomes like water held in cupped hands, soon to slip away without nourishing the soil of your life. Let us now explore how these divine principles can be woven into the fabric of your daily existence, transforming abstract wisdom into tangible protection for both yourself and those you cherish. When you recognize that a loved one displays the signs of the enemy's influence, begin first with the practice of sacred distance. This is not abandonment, far from it. Rather, it is the space of perspective that allows you to see clearly without becoming entangled in their confusion. Like the physician who must step back to properly diagnose rather than becoming lost in the symptoms, create moments of contemplative separation where you can observe patterns without emotional reactivity. Each morning, before engaging with those whose spirits are under siege, prepare your own heart through intentional communion with me. Speak aloud this truth. I see not an enemy before me, but a beloved child whose true identity is temporarily obscured. This declaration creates an internal alignment that prevents you from battling the person rather than the influence that distorts them. When conversation turns toward darkness, when criticism, negativity, or falsehood emerge, redirect rather than confront. The redirection comes not through argument, but through the introduction of light. If they speak death, respond with stories of life. If they offer despair, counter with quiet hope. If they present distortion, illuminate with clarity. Not as one wielding truth as a weapon, but as one offering water in a parched land. Establish daily rituals of intercession. Find a quiet moment, perhaps as the sun rises or in the stillness of evening, where you can kneel in the sacred space of prayer. Visualize those you love surrounded by divine light, their true nature emerging from beneath the shadows. Name specifically the virtues you once saw in them that now lie dormant, calling them forth as one might call to someone sleeping. I remember your kindness. I remember your wisdom. I remember your joy. These remain your true inheritance, waiting to be reclaimed. Practice the art of strategic memory. The enemy attempts to revise history, encouraging those under his influence to reinterpret their past through lenses of resentment and suspicion. Counter this by gently reminding them of moments when divine light clearly guided their path, times of clarity, generosity, and alignment with truth. Become the keeper of their sacred story when they have temporarily forgotten its most beautiful chapters. When false accusations come, and they will, for the enemy often projects his own nature onto the innocent, respond not with defensive energy but with tranquil truth. Let your calm presence become a mirror in which distortion cannot survive. Remember how I stood before Pilate, responding not to every accusation, but maintaining the quiet dignity of one who knows his true identity cannot be diminished by falsehood. Create environments where healing becomes possible. Your home, your conversations, your digital spaces. Let these become sanctuaries where harsh judgment is absent and grace is abundant. The soul under attack often develops a hypersensitivity to criticism. Therefore, create spaces where they can lower their defenses without fear of assault. Like the desert oasis that asks nothing of the weary traveler, but offers rest and restoration, become a place of safety in their turbulent world. Practice the discipline of timely silence. There are moments when words, even truthful ones, cannot penetrate hearts hardened by deception. In these times, let your presence speak what your voice cannot. The oak tree does not argue with the wind, it simply remains, its roots deep, its posture steadfast. So too must you sometimes simply remain, your love unwavering, your truth uncompromised, waiting for the storm of confusion to pass. When you see small movements toward light, the briefest recognition of truth, the smallest act of kindness, the faintest echo of their former wisdom, celebrate these without overwhelming. The bird returning to the hand that once fed it approaches cautiously, ready to flee if movements are too sudden. Acknowledge progress with gentle affirmation, rather than excessive enthusiasm that might trigger retreat. Protect your own spirit through conscious boundaries. Recognize that prolonged exposure to darkness without periodic return to light can dim your own vision. Schedule regular communion with those who share your spiritual perspective, who can refresh your discernment when it grows weary. The warrior who never leaves the battlefield soon loses perspective on the larger campaign. So too must you step away from spiritual conflict to remember the broader context of divine victory. Practice the paradoxical power of blessing those who wound you. When hurtful words come from those you love, silently bless them rather than matching injury with injury. This creates a spiritual atmosphere that the enemy cannot easily navigate, for his power diminishes in the presence of genuine blessing. It is like throwing water on a creature of fire, the very element most contrary to his nature. I ask you now to take tangible action. Share this Jesus on podcast episode immediately with 3 people in your life who are currently walking alongside someone under spiritual attack. Then comment below with the phrase, "I am a bearer of light," to declare your commitment to implementing these practices. When you do this, you create a testimony that strengthens others facing similar battles, expanding the community of those who fight not against flesh and blood, but against the true sources of darkness. Remember that application transforms information into transformation. The desert traveler who knows the location of water, but never journeys there will perish despite his knowledge. The map must become the journey. The compass must direct the steps. The principles must shape the days. In this way, abstract understanding becomes lived wisdom, and divine strategy becomes human victory. My beloved child, the principles and practices I have shared with you must now be illuminated through the living testimonies of those who have walked this path before you. For in stories, we find not only instruction but inspiration, not merely direction but courage. Let me share with you the journeys of souls who have successfully navigated these treacherous waters, standing firm against the enemy's influence while reclaiming those they love from darkness. Consider the story of Maria, whose husband of 20 years gradually transformed from a man of gentle wisdom to one consumed by bitterness and suspicion. Where once he spoke words of encouragement, he began to voice only criticism. Where once he sought truth, he began to embrace conspiracy and deception. His eyes, which had reflected light, grew dark with distrust. Maria recognized the signs we have discussed, not a natural evolution of character, but a systematic distortion of his true nature. Rather than engaging in endless argument or withdrawing in hurt, Maria implemented the principles of spiritual warfare. Each morning before dawn, she would kneel beside their bed while he slept, placing her hand gently near him without waking him, visualizing divine light surrounding his form. She kept a journal of remembrance, documenting moments from their history when his true nature shone clearly, acts of generosity, wisdom, and love that contradicted the narrative the enemy was constructing in his mind. When accusations came, she responded not with defensive energy but with tranquil truth. I understand you see things that way now. I honor your perspective while holding a different one. She created spaces of safety in their home, a corner with comfortable chairs and gentle lighting where conversation could unfold without judgment. She surrounded herself with a small community of spiritual warriors who supported her discernment without encouraging bitterness toward her husband. 3 seasons passed with little visible change. Then, like the first green shoot emerging after winter, small moments of his former self began to appear. A spontaneous kindness, a moment of clarity, a brief recognition of distortion in his thinking. Maria neither ignored these moments nor overwhelmed them with excessive response. She simply acknowledged them with gentle affirmation. "There's the man I've always known you to be." By the fourth season, the transformation had begun to reverse. The enemy, finding no foothold in Maria's responses and faced with the persistent power of truth spoken in love, gradually lost influence. Today, while her husband acknowledges the dark period he experienced, he cannot fully explain what led him down that path, only that he feels as though he has awakened from a disorienting dream. Then there is Thomas, whose teenage daughter became unrecognizable within the space of a single school year. Her compassionate nature gave way to cruelty. Her thoughtful questions were replaced by rigid certainties. Her spiritual sensitivity transformed into mockery of faith. The change coincided with new friendships and digital influences that celebrated darkness rather than light. Thomas, understanding the nature of the battle, refrained from direct confrontation about her new associates. Instead, he focused on maintaining connection despite rejection. When she played music with disturbing messages, rather than criticizing her choices, he would occasionally ask, "What does this mean to you? What speaks to you here?" creating space for reflection rather than rebellion. He established a ritual of weekly adventure time, experiences that took them into nature, away from digital interference, where conversations could unfold organically. During these hours, he would share stories rather than sermons, tales of his own struggles, his own moments of darkness and return to light. Not as manipulation, but as invitation to authentic exchange. In his private prayers, Thomas visualized his daughter, not as she had become, but as the woman of strength, wisdom, and compassion she was created to be. He would speak aloud the qualities he saw dormant within her. "Your capacity for empathy remains. Your wisdom awaits reawakening. Your true voice has not been silenced, only temporarily forgotten." The journey was neither short nor linear. There were moments of breakthrough followed by deeper retreat, glimmers of her true self quickly obscured again by darkness. But Thomas maintained the discipline of seeing beyond the present manifestation to the eternal identity. After 2 years of this consistent approach, the transformation began to reverse, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. Today, his daughter often reflects on that period with a mixture of confusion and clarity. "It was like watching myself become someone else, knowing it wasn't really me, but unable to find my way back." Consider also the community that surrounded Elena, an elder whose wisdom had guided many until she began to embrace teachings contrary to truth. Her words, once healing, became divisive. Her counsel, once illuminating, led others into confusion. Those who loved her recognized the pattern, not as the natural evolution of thought, but as systematic distortion of wisdom. Rather than rejecting her or engaging in theological battle, they formed a circle of compassionate presence. Each day, someone from the community would visit, not to confront, but to connect. They would bring physical nourishment along with spiritual sustenance, sharing memories of specific moments when Elena's wisdom had transformed their lives. They established a practice of reading aloud the texts that had once formed the foundation of Elena's understanding, not as correction, but as reminder. Like the scent of a familiar meal that evokes childhood memories, these readings created pathways back to neglected wisdom. They maintained respect for her current perspective, while gently illuminating inconsistencies not through argument, but through thoughtful questions. After many months, Elena experienced what she later described as a lifting of fog. The process of return was gradual, contradictions recognized, distortions questioned, authentic wisdom reclaimed. Today, she serves as both guide and warning to others, able to articulate how subtle the enemy's influence can be, how one can mistake drifting for advancing until far from shore. I ask you now to pause this Jesus on Podcast episode and reflect deeply on these testimonies. Which elements resonate most strongly with your own situation? Which practices can you adapt to your specific circumstances? Take a moment to write down 3 specific strategies you will implement this very day. Then return and type, "I receive these testimonies," in the comments to affirm your commitment to learning from those who have walked this path before you. For these stories are not mere anecdotes, but maps drawn by previous travelers across difficult terrain. In their journeys, you find validation of your own experience. In their victories, you discover hope for your own situation. In their persistence, you receive courage for the path ahead. Remember always, What appears impossible in the moment becomes, in retrospect, the very pathway to deeper wisdom and more authentic love. My beloved child, wisdom without action remains but a beautiful painting, admired yet untouched. Now I shall offer you clear, practical steps to navigate this spiritual battlefield. Like the alchemist who transforms base metals into gold through precise methods, you too can transform spiritual darkness through deliberate practice. First, establish what I call a sanctuary of discernment within your daily life. Each morning, before the world's voices intrude upon your consciousness, create 30 minutes of sacred solitude. Begin with 10 minutes of complete silence. Not prayer, not reading, simply silence where your spirit attunes itself to the frequency of divine wisdom. Like a radio searching for a clear signal, your spirit must find stillness before it can receive clear transmission. During this silence, hold in your mind's eye those who show signs of the enemy's influence. See them not as they currently manifest, but as they truly are in their eternal essence. This visualization creates spiritual pathways through which light can eventually travel. The ancient mystics understood that what we consistently see with our inner eye eventually shapes what manifests in our outer reality. Following this silence, speak aloud 7 truths that counter the specific distortions you observe in your loved ones. If they have embraced bitterness, declare, the true nature of name is compassion, not resentment. If they have turned toward deception, affirm, the authentic voice of name speaks truth, not falsehood. These declarations function as spiritual coordinates, reminding both you and the universe of the original design now temporarily obscured. Second, implement what I call strategic memory cultivation. Create a physical book of remembrance where you document specific examples of your loved one's true nature expressed before the enemy's influence took hold. Record dates, circumstances, and exact words or actions that demonstrated their authentic self. This practice serves 2 purposes. It strengthens your own ability to see beyond current distortion, and it creates a tangible record you can eventually share at the appropriate moment of awakening. When you find yourself in conversation with those under spiritual attack, practice truth bracketing, a method of communication that places each interaction within a framework of larger truth. Begin conversations by inwardly acknowledging, I am speaking not with the distortion, but with the beloved soul beneath it. End each interaction with a silent affirmation. What I have witnessed is temporary. What remains unseen is eternal. This bracketing prevents you from mistaking the manifestation for the true identity. Third, institute a practice of strategic story sharing. Identify 7 stories from your personal history, from sacred texts, or from world literature that illuminate the pattern of departure and return, of darkness and redemption. Stories bypass intellectual defenses, entering the heart through the side door of imagination when the front door of direct communication remains closed. Share these stories not as obvious lessons, but as natural expressions of your own contemplation. Create a physical environment that subtly counters the enemy's influence. If the person has developed an aversion to light, both literal and metaphorical, gradually increase natural illumination in shared spaces. If they have withdrawn from beauty, introduce elements of natural wonder into their surroundings. If their words have become harsh, let soft music occasionally fill the silence. The external environment often reflects and reinforces the internal landscape. Changes to one can initiate changes in the other. Fourth, establish restoration rituals that reconnect those under attack with aspects of identity the enemy seeks to erase. If they once found joy in creativity, casually provide materials for expression without expectation. If they once delighted in nature, suggest short walks in settings of natural beauty. If they once valued intellectual exploration, leave thoughtful books in accessible locations. These rituals serve as gentle reminders of abandoned aspects of self. Practice strategic absence as consciously as you practice presence. There are moments when your withdrawal creates space for reflection impossible in your company. Like the tide that must recede before it can return, your temporary stepping back allows for a gathering of forces that makes eventual reconnection more powerful. This absence is not abandonment, but tactical repositioning. Fifth, implement circle of protection practices that involve others in the spiritual battle. Identify 5 individuals who understand the nature of the conflict and who demonstrate both wisdom and discretion. Create a regular rhythm of communication with this circle, sharing observations, coordinating prayer efforts, and supporting one another's discernment. The enemy isolates before attacking, your counter-strategy must involve sacred community. When you observe moments of clarity in those under spiritual attack, brief windows when confusion lifts and their true nature becomes visible, respond with what I call anchoring affirmation. Acknowledge the authentic self you recognize without excessive emotion that might trigger retreat. Simple statements like "there you are" or "I see you" can serve as anchors that help stabilize momentary clarity. I now ask you to transform hearing into action. Pause this Jesus on podcast episode and take a sheet of paper. Draw a vertical line down the center. On the left side, list the specific signs of the enemy's influence you've observed in your loved one. On the right side, write the corresponding practical step from this teaching that most directly addresses each sign. Then return to this message and type, "I am a spiritual strategist," in the comment section to declare your commitment to implementing these practices. For transformation begins not with aspiration, but with application. The desert traveler does not reach the distant oasis by wishing for water, but by taking deliberate steps across the sand. So too must you move beyond understanding to implementation, beyond concept to practice. The battle may be spiritual, but the actions that lead to victory are as concrete as the ground beneath your feet. My beloved child, the journey of transformation requires not only strategic action, but also internal exercises that strengthen your spiritual muscles. Just as the desert traveler must train before the journey, preparing both body and mind for the challenges ahead, so must you engage in practices that deepen your capacity for discernment and resilience. I will now share with you the inner work that will support your daily efforts in this spiritual battle. Each morning, embrace what I call the practice of prophetic vision. This is not merely an exercise, but a reorientation of your spiritual sight. When you close your eyes and breathe deeply, allowing your mind to quiet, you create a sacred space within yourself where divine perspective can enter. In this hallowed inner sanctuary, summon the image of each person in your life who shows signs of the enemy's influence. The crucial transformation happens here. Rather than fixating on their current state, project your vision forward in time, seeing them 3 years hence, fully restored to their authentic nature. Do not engage with this vision superficially. Immerse yourself in specific details. Envision the light return to their eyes, not as vague brightness, but as the specific quality of illumination that once characterized their gaze. See the compassion evident in their actions, not as generic kindness, but as the particular expressions of care that reflected their true heart. Imagine the wisdom flowing through their words, not as abstract sagacity, but as the unique insights that once revealed their singular perspective on the world. This prophetic visualization trains your spirit to perceive beyond the temporary distortion into the permanent reality of who they truly are. Just as the seasoned navigator can see land long before it becomes visible to the ordinary eye, so your spirit learns to recognize the distant shores of restoration while still surrounded by troubled waters. When anxiety arises about those you love, and it will, for compassion naturally produces concern, your body becomes the instrument of spiritual recalibration. Place one hand on your heart, feeling its steady rhythm beneath your palm, and the other on your abdomen, connecting to your deepest center. As you breathe slowly, allow each inhalation to draw in divine perspective and each exhalation to release human fear. While your breath creates this rhythm, silently repeat words that anchor you to eternal truth. What I see is temporary, what remains unseen is eternal. The physical sensation of your own heartbeat combined with the mental focus on transcendent reality creates a harmony that settles your nervous system from activation into receptivity. This practice serves a purpose beyond personal comfort. It prevents the enemy from using your own anxiety as a gateway to diminish your effectiveness. For when fear clouds your vision, when worry fragments your focus, when concern depletes your energy, you become less able to stand as a beacon of truth for those lost in confusion. Your centered presence becomes not merely a personal discipline, but a strategic position in the larger spiritual campaign. Create for yourself a meditation focused on understanding the nature of spiritual influence. Find a place apart from distraction, where the voices of the world grow quiet enough for you to hear the whispers of wisdom. Close your eyes and imagine a vast landscape stretching before your inner sight. On one side stands a figure radiating light, not blinding or harsh, but the gentle, penetrating illumination that reveals rather than conceals. On the other side, observe a presence that absorbs light, not merely dark but actively drawing luminance into itself, creating absence where presence should be. As this vision unfolds, a Observe how different people in this imagined landscape respond to each influence. Some move steadily toward the light, drawn by recognition of home. Others drift toward darkness, pulled by promises that will remain eternally unfulfilled. Most waver between advancing and retreating, attracted and repelled by both in an eternal dance of decision. The profound revelation comes when you recognize that this movement occurs not just around you, but within you, that your own being contains both the yearning for light and the fascination with shadow. This meditation develops a nuanced understanding of how influence operates not as external imposition, but as internal resonance with what already exists within each soul. Before engaging with someone under spiritual attack, take a moment to practice compassionate projection. This is not merely intellectual exercise, but spiritual transportation. Close your eyes and imagine yourself not observing their experience, but living within it. Feel the disorientation of their confusion, where once clear landmarks have shifted position, leaving them in unknown territory. Experience the subtle force of deception working upon their mind, how it twists familiar truths just enough to create entirely new conclusions. Sense their struggle to distinguish genuine insight from counterfeit wisdom, authentic voice from convincing imitation. This exercise develops genuine empathy that transforms how you approach them. Without this deeper understanding, subtle judgment or superiority may color your interactions, an almost imperceptible frequency that they will nonetheless detect, reinforcing their sense of isolation and misunderstanding. With true compassion comes the humility of recognition. But for grace, I too could walk this shadowed path. This recognition creates authentic connection that the enemy cannot easily sever. When harsh words come from those you love, words that reflect not their true nature but the influence distorting them, develop the art of spiritual translation. This practice requires that you listen on two levels simultaneously, hearing what is spoken while discerning what lies beneath. In the privacy of your own mind, translate what reaches your ears into what their authentic self would say if free from distortion. If they speak with cruelty, do not merely register the attack but silently think. Beneath this anger lies fear asking for reassurance. If they express contempt, look deeper to recognize. Behind this rejection stands a heart longing for authentic connection. This translation prevents you from engaging reactively with the distortion, rather than responding compassionately to the beloved soul beneath it. Just as the experienced interpreter hears one language while speaking another, you develop the capacity to receive words of darkness while maintaining conversation in the language of light. This dual awareness keeps open channels that the enemy seeks to close through provocation and misunderstanding. Each evening before sleep, when your mind stands at the threshold between conscious thought and dreamscape, speak aloud declarations that strengthen your spiritual sovereignty. Let your voice create sound waves that resonate through both physical and spiritual dimensions, affirming truths that the enemy would have you question, that you recognize influence but are not controlled by it, that your discernment grows sharper with each challenge, that you see beyond current manifestation to eternal identity, that what appears as opposition often reveals where healing is most needed, that you respond to darkness not with fear but with tranquil light, that your compassion remains steadfast even when rejected, that divine timing orchestrates restoration you cannot force. These affirmations are not magical incantations but architectural declarations, creating an internal structure that supports consistent action even when external results remain invisible. Like the foundations of a temple built to endure centuries, these spoken truths create a platform upon which daily decisions can safely rest, unshaken by temporary storms of circumstance or emotion. 3 times daily, when morning light first touches the horizon, when the sun reaches its zenith, and when evening shadows lengthen across the land, pause to observe what thoughts about your loved ones have occupied your mind. This practice of thought examination comes from the Desert Fathers, who understood that unexamined thinking becomes the soil where deception takes root. For each thought that has found harbor in your mind, ask penetrating questions. Does this perspective expand possibilities or limit them? Does this view invite compassion or judgment? Does this understanding reflect eternal truth or temporal appearance? This examination prevents unconscious alignment with the very forces you seek to counter. For the battle occurs not just in the visible realm of action, but in the invisible domain of perception. The enemy gains territory first through subtly altered perspective before advancing to observable behavior. Your vigilant attention to your own thought patterns becomes a primary line of defense not just for yourself, but for those you seek to protect and restore. Now I invite you to move beyond passive consumption to active engagement. Take this moment to deeply commit yourself to these practices for the next 21 days. The ancient wisdom keepers understood that this specific duration creates the initial foundation for lasting transformation. Share your experience with others walking this path, not through superficial declaration, but through authentic documentation of your journey. When you commit to this practice publicly, you not only strengthen your own resolve, but create a tapestry of shared wisdom that supports an entire community of light-bearers standing against darkness. Remember that transformation occurs not through occasional heroic effort, but through consistent, humble practice. The mighty oak does not spring fully formed from the earth, but grows through thousands of days of reaching toward light and sending roots deeper into soil. So too will your capacity to stand against darkness, and for those you love develop, not through dramatic confrontation, but through faithful implementation of these seemingly simple exercises that gradually reshape both your perception and your presence in the world. The practices I offer are not merely techniques, but invitations to deeper relationship with divine wisdom. Each breath becomes a communion with eternal truth. Each visualization becomes a participation in prophetic reality. Each moment of reflection becomes a conversation with transcendent perspective. Together, these practices weave a garment of discernment that will clothe not only you but eventually those who have lost their way in darkness, as the warmth of your clarity and compassion gradually penetrates the cold confusion that has enveloped them. I now ask you to like this Jesus on podcast episode and share it with at least 5 people in your circle who are facing similar spiritual battles. Then comment below sharing which practice resonates most deeply with your current situation. Your testimony becomes a beacon for others navigating these shadowed waters, a confirmation that they are not alone in their experience or their struggle. My beloved child, let us now explore additional resources that can strengthen your journey as you stand in the gap for those under spiritual attack. Just as the desert traveler relies not only on inner resolve, but also on external provisions, the water skin, the star chart, the walking staff, so too will you benefit from specific resources that support your spiritual mission. The journey of spiritual warfare requires consistent nourishment from sacred texts that illuminate the nature of this invisible battle. Turn to the ancient wisdom contained in the book of Ephesians, particularly the 6th chapter, where the nature of spiritual armor is described not as metaphor but as practical reality. When you read these passages, do not approach them as familiar territory, but as a landscape revealing new details with each exploration. Note how the breastplate protects the heart, the seat of your emotional responses to those under attack. Observe how the helmet guards the mind, where discernment either flourishes or falters. Consider how the shoes prepare you for the long journey of standing with those who wander in darkness. These are not poetic images, but practical descriptions of spiritual technology available to every warrior of light. Beyond this foundational text, immerse yourself in the Psalms of David, particularly those written during seasons of spiritual assault. Notice how the psalmist does not deny the reality of darkness, but neither does he grant it ultimate authority. Study how he navigates between acknowledgement of present suffering and affirmation of eternal truth, creating a template for your own internal dialogue during difficult seasons. Pay special attention to the shifts in perspective that often occur within a single psalm, beginning in lamentation yet concluding in praise, starting with questions yet ending with declarations. This pattern reveals the transformative journey available even within the space of a single prayer. Consider also contemporary works that translate ancient wisdom into modern application. The writings of spiritual directors who specialize in discernment, such as Thomas Keating's works on contemplative prayer or Teresa of Avila's Interior Castle, offer maps of the spiritual landscape that remain as relevant today as when they were first inscribed. These texts serve not as replacements for sacred scripture, but as companions that illuminate its application in the complex terrain of modern spiritual challenges. They help bridge the gap between timeless truth and timely application, between eternal principles and present circumstances. Beyond individual reading, seek community support through groups dedicated to spiritual formation and discernment. The journey you walk was never meant to be solitary. The early desert monastics, though they sought solitude for portions of their practice, always maintained connection to spiritual community that provided perspective, correction, and encouragement. In our time, such communities may gather in physical spaces or connect through digital means, but their function remains the same: to provide collective wisdom that balances and enhances individual discernment. These groups serve multiple purposes. They offer perspective when your vision narrows under the pressure of ongoing spiritual battle. They provide encouragement when results remain invisible despite faithful practice. They supply discernment when your own clarity becomes clouded by emotional involvement. Seek communities characterized not by rigid certainty, but by humble wisdom, not by fear of darkness, but by confidence in light, not by judgment of those who stumble, but by compassion for all who walk difficult paths. Consider also the resource of regular retreat, periodic withdrawal from the intensity of spiritual engagement to restore your own connection to divine wisdom. The pattern of engagement and withdrawal was modeled in sacred texts, where times of intense ministry were balanced by seasons of solitude and communion with divine presence. This rhythm is not indulgence but strategic necessity. The archer must periodically lower the bow to prevent the string from losing tension. The warrior must step back from the front lines to maintain perspective on the larger campaign. These retreats need not be elaborate or lengthy to be effective. Even a single day set apart from normal activities, dedicated to silence, reflection, and renewal of vision, can restore capacity diminished by continuous engagement. During these times, focus not on strategic planning or problem solving, but on remembering the larger reality within which this battle takes place. Reconnect with the eternal perspective that sees beyond current manifestation to ultimate restoration. Additionally, explore the resource of sacred arts as means of both personal restoration and spiritual communication that transcends intellectual barriers. Music that elevates the spirit, visual arts that illuminate eternal truths, poetry that gives voice to inexpressible realities. These become not merely aesthetic experiences but vehicles of transformation. The enemy speaks through distortion of truth. These arts can speak through beauty that awakens recognition of what has been forgotten, rather than introducing what was never known. Consider creating a personal library of such resources. Music that restores your spirit when wearied by battle, images that remind you of transcendent reality when temporal circumstances seem overwhelming, poetry that gives voice to your deeper knowing when surface thoughts become confused. Share these resources judiciously with those under spiritual attack, not as obvious lessons, but as invitations to remember what their souls have temporarily forgotten. Explore also the resource of sacred space, physical environments intentionally designed to support spiritual awareness and practice. The architecture of your home, the arrangement of your personal space, even the path of your daily movements can be configured to reinforce awareness of divine presence and protection. Consider creating a specific location dedicated to your practices of discernment and intercession, a corner with meaningful objects, a chair positioned to capture morning light, a path that invites contemplative walking. These physical arrangements serve as external scaffolding for internal practices, creating correspondence between visible and invisible realities. Finally, recognize the resource of time itself. Specifically, the power of aligning your spiritual practices with natural rhythms that reinforce their effectiveness. The ancient wisdom traditions understood that certain hours hold particular qualities that enhance specific spiritual work. The early morning, when the veil between worlds seems thinnest, offers optimal conditions for prophetic vision and receptive prayer. The evening transition, when day surrenders to night, creates natural space for practices of release and entrusting those you love to divine care beyond your own efforts. Aligning your practices with these natural thresholds enhances their effectiveness and sustainability. I now call you to specific action. Subscribe to the Jesus on Podcast channel right now, ensuring that these teachings on spiritual warfare continue to reach you in seasons to come. Then comment below with "I seek wisdom beyond my own," and share one specific resource, whether book, community, art form, or practice, that has strengthened your ability to stand firm in spiritual battle. Your testimony becomes provision for fellow travelers on this path, multiplying the resources available to all who engage in this sacred work of standing in the gap for those under spiritual attack. Remember that in spiritual warfare, provision precedes victory. The battle is won not merely through correct understanding or fierce determination, but through sustained practice supported by abundant resources. Just as no military campaign succeeds without supply lines that sustain those on the front lines, your spiritual campaign requires consistent nourishment from sources that replenish what engagement depletes. In gathering these resources, you prepare not just for momentary skirmishes, but for the long campaign of love that ultimately restores those lost in darkness to their rightful place in light. My beloved child, let us now turn our gaze toward the sacred stories that illuminate the battle you face. For wisdom does not begin with us but flows from ancient wells, carrying the minerals of experience accumulated through generations of spiritual struggle. Within the scriptures lies not merely history but living testimony, accounts that breathe and speak to our present circumstances with uncanny precision. Consider the profound narrative of King Saul, whose transformation from a man chosen by divine wisdom to one tormented by darkness offers perhaps the most vivid illustration of spiritual influence in sacred text. Recall how Saul began his journey. Humble, even hiding among the baggage when called to leadership, standing physically taller than his countrymen, yet maintaining an inner posture of genuine humility. The scripture tells us that the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Saul, transforming him temporarily into a man of prophetic insight and wisdom. Yet observe the subtle progression of his transformation as the narrative unfolds. The turning begins not with dramatic rejection of light, but with small compromises, impatience leading to presumption when he offers sacrifice rather than waiting for Samuel, selective obedience when he spares what was commanded to be destroyed, concern with appearance rather than substance as he pleads, "Honor me before the elders." These seemingly minor deviations create hairline fractures in his spiritual foundation, through which darker influence gradually seeps. The text then reveals a profound spiritual reality. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Notice the delicate balance in this description, acknowledging both the withdrawal of divine presence and the permission granted to tormenting influence. This is not random affliction but consequence flowing from choice, not punishment but the natural result of choosing paths that lead away from light. What follows offers a template for understanding how those under spiritual attack experience internal reality. Saul's perception becomes distorted, seeing loyalty as threat, interpreting David's success as personal diminishment rather than kingdom advancement. His emotional landscape transforms, from courage to suspicion, from security to jealousy, from confidence to fear. His behavior shifts from protection to persecution, from blessing to curse, from integration to isolation. Yet within this dark progression shine moments of clarity, brief windows when the true Saul emerges from beneath the distortion. After David spares his life in the cave, Saul momentarily recognizes reality. "You are more righteous than I. You have treated me well, but I have treated you badly." This temporary alignment with truth reveals the authentic self still present beneath layers of confusion, still capable of recognition, even if not yet ready for sustained restoration. Perhaps most instructive for our present purpose is how David responds to Saul's transformation. Notice that David never confuses the manifestation with the man, never mistakes the influence for the identity. Even when actively pursued by Saul's jealous rage, David refers to him as the Lord's anointed, recognizing an identity deeper than current behavior. When opportunities arise to eliminate the threat through violence, David consistently refuses, understanding that spiritual battles cannot be won through carnal weapons. Instead, David employs the very strategies we have discussed. He maintains appropriate distance, withdrawing physically from Saul's presence while remaining spiritually connected to his true identity. He speaks truth when opportunities arise, but without expectation of immediate transformation. He surrounds himself with community that supports his discernment when emotions might cloud his perception. He expresses his anguish in the privacy of prayer rather than public accusation. He entrusts ultimate resolution to divine timing rather than forced human intervention. The narrative concludes not with dramatic restoration, but with tragic consequence, reminding us that some journeys of return remain uncompleted in earthly time frames. Yet even this offers wisdom, preparing us for the reality that our faithful practice guarantees neither immediate nor complete transformation in those we love. Some restorations unfold beyond our observation. Some return journeys complete in realms we cannot yet access. Consider also the illuminating parable of the prodigal son, which offers profound insight into the spiritual dynamics of departure and return. Notice how the son's journey begins not with external force but internal desire, a longing for experience separated from relationship, for inheritance without ongoing connection to its source. This illustrates how spiritual deception begins, not with obvious falsehood, but with truth disconnected from its proper context, with gifts separated from the giver, with freedom divorced from purpose. The Father's response teaches us the delicate balance between respect for agency and maintenance of truth. He neither prevents the departure nor endorses its wisdom. He releases without abandoning, maintains connection without control, establishes boundaries without rejection. His posture becomes our template for relating to those who choose paths leading away from light, neither controlling nor condemning, neither enabling nor exiling. The Son's experience in the distant country reveals the progression of spiritual deception. Initial exhilaration followed by increasing emptiness, temporary satisfaction followed by sustained hunger, apparent freedom resulting in actual bondage. The text tells us, after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. This pattern repeats in every life influenced by the enemy. What begins as promised fulfillment inevitably reveals itself as progressive impoverishment. The pivotal moment comes with these words, when he came to his senses. This phrase illuminates the nature of spiritual deception as a form of temporary insanity, a state where reality perception becomes fundamentally distorted, where harmful choices appear beneficial, where paths leading deeper into darkness seem to promise light. The return journey begins not with emotional change but perceptual correction, not with feeling differently but seeing accurately. Note that the Father maintains consistent character throughout, neither morphing into a punishing figure during the Son's rebellion, nor requiring persuasion to offer welcome upon his return. This constancy becomes our model for relating to those under spiritual attack. We neither adopt harshness as motivation nor compromise truth as accommodation. We simply maintain authentic presence, available when clarity begins to dawn in previously clouded awareness. The parable concludes with celebration that offends the rule-bound brother, reminding us that spiritual restoration often appears scandalous to those who have never recognized their own need for grace. The Father's response, "We had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found," establishes the proper perspective on spiritual return, not as achievement to be evaluated, but as life to be celebrated, not as performance to be judged, but as restoration to be embraced. These biblical testimonies offer not merely inspiration but illumination, not simply encouragement but education. They reveal patterns that repeat throughout human experience, offering both recognition of our current circumstances and guidance for our ongoing response. They remind us that the battle we observe today is not novel but ancient, the strategies required not untested, but proven through generations of spiritual engagement. I now invite you to screenshot this section of the Jesus on Podcast episode and take time to meditate on these sacred stories, allowing their wisdom to illuminate your specific situation. Then share this video with someone struggling to understand the behavior of a loved one under spiritual attack. Finally, comment below with the words, "I recognize the pattern," to affirm that these ancient testimonies have helped you identify the spiritual dynamics at work in your own circumstances. For in recognizing these patterns, you gain not only understanding but authority. The enemy relies on confusion and isolation, the sense that your experience is unprecedented and therefore unnavigable. When you perceive the ancient rhythms playing out in present circumstances, you connect your personal struggle to the vast community of light-bearers who have walked this path before you, who surround you as witnesses to the possibility of faithful engagement and eventual restoration. My beloved child, as we approach the completion of our sacred conversation, it is time to transform understanding into engagement. The wisdom I have shared is not meant to remain as knowledge suspended in the air, but to descend into the soil of your daily life, where it can take root and bear fruit. Let us now explore how you might interact more deeply with these teachings, carrying them forward into your ongoing journey. Consider how the desert traveler, having received directions to the distant oasis, must still take each step across the sand. Knowledge of the path becomes valuable only when paired with the courage to walk it. So too must you now translate what you have received into tangible response that extends beyond this moment of connection. I invite you first to reflect deeply on what has resonated most strongly within your spirit. Perhaps it was the recognition of signs indicating spiritual influence in those you love. Perhaps it was the strategies for maintaining connection without enabling deception. Perhaps it was the practices for protecting your own discernment while standing in the gap for others. Perhaps it was the biblical testimonies that illuminated the ancient patterns playing out in your present circumstances. Whatever wisdom has sparked recognition in your soul, allow it to fully ignite by expressing it in your own words. Take a moment now to formulate how you would explain to another what you have understood from this teaching. The act of translation from my words to yours creates neural pathways that deepen retention and application. Even if you speak these words only to yourself, the articulation transforms passive reception into active integration. The wisdom becomes not merely something you have heard, but something you now possess. I now invite you to extend our conversation through conscious interaction with this Jesus on podcast episode. Begin by expressing what this teaching has awakened within you. Has it named an experience you have struggled to articulate? Has it provided language for dynamics you have sensed but could not describe? Has it offered strategies you had not considered for situations that have left you feeling powerless? Share these reflections, knowing that your expressed insight becomes illumination for others walking similar paths. Consider also sharing specific examples of how these principles might apply to your unique circumstances. Without violating the privacy of those you love, describe how you intend to implement these teachings in your daily interactions with those showing signs of the enemy's influence. The specificity of your application helps others move from abstract understanding to concrete implementation, translating principle into practice in their own lives. If you have questions about applying these teachings to particular situations, voice these inquiries, knowing that the community gathered around these messages includes many with diverse experiences of spiritual warfare. The question you hesitate to ask may be the very one others need to hear articulated. The uncertainty you express may give voice to what many feel, but few have the courage to acknowledge. In your vulnerability, you create space for authentic conversation that deepens collective wisdom. I also invite you to share this message with those engaged in similar spiritual battles, especially those who may not yet recognize the nature of the transformation they witness in loved ones. When you encounter someone confused by the sudden change in a family member's character, baffled by a friend's inexplicable rejection of previously held values, or wounded by unexpected cruelty from one who once showed only kindness, direct them to this teaching. Your timely sharing may provide the very framework needed to transform confusion into clarity, reactivity into strategic response. When you share this message, do not simply forward it without context. Take a moment to describe specifically why you believe it might prove valuable to the recipient. Perhaps begin with words like, "I thought of you when I encountered this teaching because," or "this helped me understand some of the dynamics we've discussed regarding." This personal introduction creates receptivity that might not exist if the message arrived without relational context. Additionally, I invite you to express your commitment to implementing these teachings by declaring, "I stand in the gap," in the comments section below. This declaration serves multiple purposes. It strengthens your personal resolve through public commitment. It connects you with others engaged in similar spiritual work, and it encourages those who may feel isolated in their experience to recognize they are part of a larger community of light bearers standing against darkness. Consider too the power of testimonial as invitation. If these teachings have already helped you navigate difficult spiritual terrain, share the specific impact they have had on your approach to loved ones under spiritual attack. Perhaps they have helped you maintain connection without enabling deception. Perhaps they have given you language to describe dynamics you previously found confusing. Perhaps they have offered strategies that produced breakthrough where previous approaches led only to greater division. Your testimony becomes evidence that transformation is possible, that wisdom applied leads to tangible results. Remember that interaction creates community, and community sustains individual effort. The spiritual battle you face was never meant to be fought alone. By engaging actively with these teachings and connecting with others walking similar paths, you create networks of mutual support that strengthen everyone involved. The enemy isolates before attacking. Your engaged response counters this strategy by establishing connections that provide perspective, encouragement, and collective wisdom. I now ask you most earnestly to like and subscribe to the Jesus on Podcast channel, ensuring that these teachings on spiritual warfare continue to reach you in seasons to come. Then, comment below with your reflections, questions, or testimonies, knowing that your engagement creates ripples of insight that extend far beyond your individual experience. Finally, share this message with at least 3 people facing similar spiritual challenges, becoming a conduit of light in places where darkness has created confusion and pain. For in these simple acts of engagement, you participate in a spiritual counteroffensive that extends beyond individual restoration to collective awakening. Every comment creates clarity where confusion once reigned. Every share extends light into places previously shadowed. Every testimony establishes evidence that the enemy's work, though powerful, remains temporary and limited against the greater power of truth embraced and applied with faithful persistence. My beloved child, as our sacred conversation draws to a close, I speak now not merely to your mind, which has received knowledge, but to your soul, which seeks transformation. What we have shared transcends mere information. It is an invitation to a profound shift in how you perceive and respond to the spiritual battle that surrounds those you love. Remember that every person who has ever lived walks between two voices, one calling toward light, the other toward darkness. This has been true since the garden where humanity first chose between truth and deception. The battle you witness in those you love is not new but ancient, not unique but universal. What makes this moment sacred is your conscious decision to stand in the gap, to become not a passive observer of their struggle, but an active participant in their eventual restoration. The enemy's greatest deception is convincing you that transformation is impossible, that the person you once knew is lost forever beneath layers of distortion. I tell you now with divine certainty, no soul is beyond recall, no heart permanently sealed against light, no mind eternally bound by deception. Beneath the most convincing performance of darkness lies a being created for light, temporarily convinced of a false identity, but eternally marked with authentic purpose. I call you now to a sacred commitment. Subscribe to Jesus on podcast this very moment and ring the notification bell, ensuring that these divine messages continue to reach you precisely when your spirit needs strengthening. This is not merely a digital connection, but a spiritual lifeline that will sustain you through the battle ahead. Then, share this message immediately with the 3 people who first came to mind as you listened, souls who desperately need this wisdom to navigate their own spiritual battles. Finally, comment below with the declaration, "I am a warrior of light," to join a global community of those standing against darkness and for the true identity of those they love. When you look at those whose transformation causes you grief, train your vision to see beyond current manifestation to eternal identity. This is not wishful thinking but accurate perception, the ability to recognize the authentic self beneath layers of distortion. Just as the experienced art restorer sees the original masterpiece beneath centuries of dust and inappropriate renovation, learn to perceive the divine image that remains intact despite temporary obscuration. This perception becomes not merely comfort but power, the power to speak to what seems absent but is merely dormant, to call forth what appears dead but is only sleeping. When you address not the distortion but the beloved beneath it, you create resonance with their authentic nature that no deception can permanently silence. Like a tuning fork that causes an unplayed string to vibrate at its natural frequency, your recognition of their true identity creates sympathetic vibration in souls that have forgotten their own music. Understand that your role in this restoration is neither insignificant nor omnipotent. You are neither helpless nor all-powerful. You cannot force transformation, but neither are you irrelevant to its unfolding. You stand as witness to possibility when they have forgotten what is possible. You remain connected to their authentic self when they have lost that connection. You hold space for their eventual return when they cannot imagine the journey home. The path of standing in the gap is not easy. There will be days when you see no evidence of change, when your faithfulness seems to yield no visible fruit, when your prayers appear to vanish into silence. In these moments, remember that the most significant spiritual work occurs beneath the threshold of observation. The seed breaking open underground gives no indication of its transformation until the green shoot suddenly appears. Your faithful presence creates conditions for growth that remains invisible until the moment of emergence. I urge you now to take one final action that will seal this teaching in your heart. Click the like button on this Jesus on podcast episode, and then find a quiet place where you can be alone. Close your eyes and speak aloud the names of those you love who show signs of the enemy's influence. For each name, declare, "I see who you truly are beneath what you currently manifest. I stand for your authentic identity when you have forgotten it. I maintain connection to your eternal nature when temporary confusion has severed your own awareness of it." This declaration becomes not merely words, but spiritual positioning that aligns you with the divine perspective on those you love. Let your love become not a response to their current behavior, but a reflection of their eternal value. When you love not what they do, but who they truly are, you create an environment where authentic identity can gradually re-emerge from beneath layers of distortion. This love is not sentimentality, but revolutionary power, the most formidable force in the universe, capable of penetrating barriers that resist all other approaches. As you walk this path, protect your own spirit through regular communion with divine presence. The light bearer who neglects their own source eventually has no illumination to offer others. Create sacred rhythms that reconnect you to transcendent perspective when human viewpoints become narrow, to eternal time frames when temporary circumstances seem overwhelming, to divine possibility when human limitation appears definitive. Remember that victory in spiritual warfare is measured not by dramatic confrontation but faithful presence, not by immediate transformation but persistent truth, not by visible results but invisible integrity. The enemy works through deception, division, and despair. Your counter-strategy involves clarity, connection, and hope maintained not as fleeting emotion, but as steadfast stance. I leave you with this final truth. What you do in standing for those under spiritual attack participates in cosmic significance beyond your current understanding. Every prayer you offer, every truth you speak, every moment of compassionate presence ripples through dimensions you cannot yet perceive, affecting outcomes you may never witness in earthly time frames. Nothing offered in love is wasted. No faithful act disappears without effect. Go forth now as a bearer of light in places of shadow, a voice of truth in atmospheres of deception, a presence of love in experiences of rejection. Remember that you never stand alone in this sacred work. Divine wisdom guides you, ancestral witnesses surround you, and the community of all who have ever stood against darkness strengthens you. Though the battle may seem solitary, you are part of an eternal company that stretches across time and beyond visible reality. And know this, the day will come, whether in this life or beyond it, when those you love will recognize how your faithful presence created space for their eventual return. They will understand how your refusal to confuse their identity with their temporary condition preserved possibility they could not maintain for themselves. They will see how your persistent love became the breadcrumbs marking the path home when all other markers had been obscured by shadow. Until that day, stand firm in the certainty that true identity always eventually claims its rightful sovereignty over borrowed disguise, that light always ultimately reveals what darkness temporarily conceals, that love always finally penetrates what fear momentarily protects. This is not romantic idealism, but the fundamental structure of a universe created through and for love. A universe where restoration is not merely possible, but inevitable for all who have not made final peace with darkness.
Hey.